learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Today, we're diving into a really crucial time in Japanese history, the Taisho and early Showa eras.
That's right. We're looking at the rise and, well, also the fall of party politics. It's quite a story.
Yeah, we'll explore how party cabinets got started, what big changes they brought in.
Like universal manhood suffrage.
Exactly. And also, the tensions underneath it all that eventually caused problems.
We'll also touch on that short spell of non-party cabinets just before things really kicked off.
Okay, so let's start there then. After the Takahashi Korekiyo cabinet, what happened?
Well, for about 2 years, maybe a bit less, Japan had 3 cabinets in a row that weren't based on political parties.
Interesting. Just 2 years, but it sounds like it was significant.
It really was, because it set the stage for what came next. It sort of provoked a reaction.
Right, so like in 1924, you get the Kiyura Kaigo cabinet.
Yes, and its support base was mostly in the House of Peers, the appointed, not elected House.
Ah, okay. So not exactly representing the popular will, perhaps.
That's exactly how some people saw it, and it led to quite a bit of pushback.
From which groups?
3 main ones: the Constitutional Association, the Seiyokai, and the Kakushin Club. They actually banded together.
Oh, really? What were they called?
They became known as the 3 constitutionalist factions, the Goken Thampa.
Goken Sampa.
Ah,
And they weren't fans of the Kiyura cabinet, I take it.
not at all. They were fiercely opposed. They even called it an anachronistic cabinet by the privileged class.
Wow, strong words. So they felt it was like a step backward.
Pretty much. Their goal was clear.
Yeah.
Get rid of Kiyura and bring in a government based on, actual political parties elected by the people.
And this led to a movement.
Yes, the Second Constitutional Protection Movement. A real campaign to get party government back on track.
So how did the Kiyura government react? Did they just ignore it?
Oh, no, they reacted. They dissolved the House of Representatives,
Yeah.
tried to sort of reset things.
A bold move. Did it work out for them?
Not really. Not in the way they hoped, anyway.
Because then there was an election, right, later that year, 1924.
Exactly. And in that general election, those 3 constitutionalist factions, they won big.
How big?
An absolute majority in the House of Representatives.
Okay, so that pretty much sealed the deal for Kiyura.
Completely. The cabinet had no choice but to resign. It was a decisive moment.
And this paved the way for who took over?
Kato Takaaki. He was the president of the Constitutional Association, which was the biggest party after the election.
Oh, the leading party.
Right. And he formed a coalition cabinet, bringing in the other 2 parties from the Goken Sampa.
So a government born out of that opposition movement, what were their main goals? What kind of policies did they push?
Well, on the foreign policy side, they promoted something called cooperative diplomacy and disarmament, trying to cut military spending.
Okay, sounds reasonable. What about domestic policy?
Domestically, and this was huge, with the backing of the Seiyokai, they finally achieved something people had wanted for a long time.
Let me guess. Universal manhood suffrage.
You got it. That was the big one. A landmark achievement, really.
When did that happen officially?
In 1925, they revised the House of Representatives election law, and the universal manhood suffrage law was passed.
And what did it actually mean? Who could vote?
It meant all men aged 25 and over got the right to vote. Didn't matter how much tax they paid.
That must have dramatically changed the electorate.
Oh, massively.
Yeah.
The number of voters jumped to about 4 times what it was before. Imagine that shift.
Huge. But we should clarify, it was manhood suffrage. Right?
Yes, that's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Women still couldn't vote at this stage. That came later.
Right. Now, it's kind of striking. In the very same year, 1925, they passed this major expansion of voting rights. But they also passed another really significant law, one that seems almost opposite in spirit.
Ah, you mean the Peace Preservation Law, the Chiani-Jiho.
Exactly, passed in the same session. What was that about?
Well, its stated purpose was to control activities aimed at changing the national polity or denying the private property system.
So, targeting certain political ideas.
Primarily, yes. It was largely framed as a response to the growing communist movement at the time.
Okay, so there's this expansion of democracy on one hand, but new restrictions on the other. Why then? What was the context?
Good question. You see, this law really put limits on the activities of socialist parties, the so-called proletarian parties.
And the timing. Was it linked to anything else?
Well, yes. Japan had just established diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union that same year, 1925.
Oh, okay.
And there were definite anxieties about communist ideas spreading, especially now that so many more people could vote thanks to universal suffrage.
So fear of radicalization among the newly enfranchised population, maybe.
That was certainly part of the official reasoning. But the law, well, it ended up being used more broadly.
How so? What do you mean?
Unfortunately, it wasn't just used against communists. Over time, the Peace Preservation Law became a tool to suppress liberal and even just general democratic movements, too. Anything seen as challenging the status quo could potentially fall under it.
That's quite concerning. Shows a real tension in the era.
It definitely does, a complex picture.
It helps sometimes to look internationally. How did Japan's move to universal manhood suffrage in 1925 compare to other countries? Were they ahead? Behind?
That's a great way to put it in perspective. Universal suffrage itself, voting without restrictions based on tax or status, it varied a lot.
Like France, for example.
France adopted universal manhood suffrage pretty early, relatively speaking, back in 1848, after the February Revolution, though before that, voting was very limited.
What about somewhere like Germany?
Germany's interesting. Prussia, the big state within Germany, had this weird three-class voting system based on taxes right into the 20th century for its own elections.
But the German Empire overall.
The empire actually had universal manhood suffrage from when it was founded in 1871. Some say it was a political move by Bismarck to get popular support against liberals.
Okay. And the U.S. and Britain, kind of the classic examples we often think of.
In the U.S., it was more gradual state by state, but generally, universal white manhood suffrage was achieved by the mid-19th century, though obviously excluding many groups.
Right, yeah.
Britain had several reforms starting in 1832. They finally got to universal manhood suffrage in 1918, and at that point, some women over 30 with property also got the vote.
So women's suffrage is a whole other timeline.
Absolutely. The movement really picked up steam in the late 1800s in America and Europe.
Who was first?
New Zealand, actually, 1893 for national elections.
Wow.
Then after World War I, you see Germany in 1919, the U.S. in 1920, Britain fully in 1928, giving women equal voting rights.
But not everywhere.
No. France, surprisingly, was much later, 1945, and Switzerland even later, 1971, for national elections.
So Japan in 1925, with universal manhood suffrage, was kind of in the middle of the pack, maybe? Or at least catching up with many Western nations for men's voting rights.
Yeah, that's a fair way to put it. It was a significant step, aligning it more with trends in other major powers, at least regarding men.
Okay, coming back to Japan, you mentioned the Kato Takaaki cabinet started this period of party politics. How long did that era actually last?
Right, so from Kato Takaaki in 1924, it basically continued until 1932. That's when the Inukai Tsuyoshi cabinet collapsed because of the May 15th incident.
Nearly a decade then. And during that time, it was mostly party cabinets.
Yes, it became the norm.
Yeah.
The Seiukai and the Constitutional Association, which became the Rikkin Seido later, were the two main parties, and they basically took turns in power.
Was this seen as, like, the right way for things to be run?
Increasingly, yes.
Yeah.
Especially by influential figures, people like the Genro Saionji Kinmochi.
Yeah.
He was a really key elder statesman, and former prime ministers. They started supporting this system. They called it Kensei no Jodo, the normal way of constitutional government.
So a growing consensus, at least among the political elite.
It seemed that way, yeah. A move towards accepting party government as the standard.
But, I sense a but coming. It wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? There were problems, limitations.
Definitely. Big ones, actually. For starters, this idea of a parliamentary cabinet system. It wasn't actually written into the Meiji Constitution.
So it was more convention than law.
Exactly. And that meant the power of the Diet, the parliament, was still limited.
Limited by what? Or whom?
By powerful groups outside parliament. Think the military, the Privy Council, the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
These groups still held a lot of sway, real influence.
So they could interfere or exert pressure on the elected government.
Absolutely. And another key thing, winning a general election didn't automatically mean you formed the government, or losing didn't always mean you were out.
Really? How did changes happen then?
Often, opposition parties would actually team up with those extra parliamentary forces, the military, bureaucrats, to attack the ruling party and try to grab power.
That sounds like it could get messy. Lots of backroom deals and instability.
It certainly contributed to it. Party conflicts got pretty intense.
And you mentioned the huge increase in voters earlier. Did that cause any issues?
It did, indirectly. Suddenly you needed way more money for election campaigns to reach all these new voters.
The money factor.
Yeah, and this pushed political parties to get really entangled with the business world, the financial elites, for fundraising.
Which can lead to?
Corruption, exactly. Scandals involving politicians taking money became much more frequent. Bribery, dodgy deals.
So the public starts to lose faith.
Precisely. People started seeing party politics as corrupt, as kink-and-siege, money is power politics. Public trust really eroded.
So, okay, you have this period where party government becomes the norm, suffrage expands. But at the same time, there's this growing undercurrent of corruption, distrust, and the lingering power of unelected groups.
That's the perfect summary. It created an environment where people started looking for alternatives.
Alternatives like
Movements pushing to get rid of party politics altogether,
Yeah.
often led by the military or nationalist groups.
Why them?
Well, they could position themselves as being above the dirty, self-serving world of party politics. They claimed to represent the true interests of the nation, free from corruption.
So the very success and expansion of party politics, in a way, contained the things that would weaken it.
You could definitely argue that.
Yeah.
The push for party government achieved a lot, like universal manhood suffrage, which was a huge step.
But those internal problems, the corruption, the outside influences, the infighting, they created vulnerabilities.
Exactly, and those vulnerabilities were exploited by forces that ultimately wanted a very different kind of system. It really shows how fragile these transitions can be.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? You expand the vote dramatically with universal manhood suffrage, aiming for more democracy. But then you see these challenges emerge within the party system itself. How did that huge influx of voters ultimately shape where Japanese democracy went in the following decades?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. And maybe, are there parallels we can see elsewhere? When other countries expanded voting rights, did they face similar growing pains or pressures on their political systems? Something definitely worth pondering.